disclaimer slide. Oh, apologies, Josh. I forgot to ask Josh to start recording. Thank you very much, Josh. To note, the session is being recorded and will be made available to our chemicals cluster members who may not be able to attend this morning. Just to note that B&M analysts are the facilitators of the Durban Chemicals Cluster, and just to note our disclaimer around that. Also very important, our declaration in terms of competition law. Our virtual meeting today replaces an in-person meeting where we would usually sign a register to this effect. So please note that by joining the session today that you are in agreement with the competition law requirements. And last but not least of our housekeeping slides is acknowledgement of our funders. The Durban Chemicals Cluster operates as a public-private partnership between the KwaZulu-Natal chemicals industry and various public entities, our major support being received from eThekwini municipality, and the DCC duly acknowledges this ongoing support, which has enabled our programs, especially during the last 18 months to a year, where we've been met with some very unusual circumstances and been able to continue our support to industry. Right, into the important part of today's working group. So let's have a look at the session overview and what we intend to achieve from today's session. It's really to bring the chemical sector together in particular and to take stock of the impact of last week's unrest. We are really not here today to discuss why the events of last week played out or the bigger picture. It is a really big topic and the topic of much debate and discussion at the moment, but not for today's session. Today we are focusing absolutely on industry, in particular the chemical sector, and we would like to take stock of where we are now, what it means for the industry, and how we start to move forward. What we will seek to do is identify the extent of the actual physical damage that has occurred, whether that be direct or indirect, and what this means primarily for our operations as well as supply chain. Part of our session today will involve some very real data gathering. We will have polls in the latter half of the session to gather that information directly from our members. And there's also an online survey that has gone out. You would have seen that yesterday afternoon, and you will receive that link again later today. Sean, if I can ask you to pop that link in the chat, that's something I omitted to do before the session. Thank you. You will also find the link to that survey in the chat. This information that we will be asking of you will be returned in the format of a sector situation report that will come from B&M analysts specifically for the chemical sector. We will also be running similar working group sessions for other sectors, and we'll be able to have a good overview of how industry has been impacted. Our survey will support that data gathering and actually will be submitted to the Office of the Presidency, who have requested this feedback from us. They are working obviously on crisis management, and the information that we collect from our cluster members and the broader sector will be used to inform that. It's a 10-question survey, should take 5 minutes to complete, and you really will receive some useful feedback on that in the form of that sector situation report. So I encourage everyone, please, to complete that during the course of today. We really need to get that data in by 5 o'clock this evening. So that's enough about all those important things. At the risk of stating the obvious, I think we all know exactly what happened last week. This is not a good picture, but it shows the reality. There is a bit of a misconception I've noted out there that the unrest only occurred in KZN. This is certainly not the case. We had isolated incidents even as far as Kimberley, and this is certainly going to have a national impact. It's really not just isolated in terms of KwaZulu-Natal. The South African Property Owners Association were very quick to gather the first sort of set of useful data that I was able to find, and they published this infographic which paints quite a comprehensive picture, looking at various stats and data. The 50 billion rand impact on national GDP is a startling figure, as well as the 150,000 jobs at risk. You know, I think at the beginning of last week, we were all taken so off guard. It was quite it was a very, very sudden event that took us all by surprise. And it was only throughout the course of the week that the true impact started to become apparent. Later stats that I've seen this morning and yesterday are still in line with these numbers, and it looks like we're starting to get a clearer picture of the national impact of the unrest that took place last week. So to focus specifically on the chemical sector, we obviously have a very well-established and active chemical sector here in KwaZulu-Natal. As the Durban Chemicals Cluster, we are well in touch with the sector and responded quickly to obtain some feedback from our members as to how they were coping with the situation and how we could support. A few comments that we received at the peak of the crisis, just to give you an indication of how our members were affected, is that major damage or theft had not been reported last week, but still some factories still needed to assess the extent of this. There were some injuries noted, yet staff members were noted as being more traumatized by the events, which were quite frightening in most cases. Our firms were able to quickly mobilize their COVID-19 communication channels to keep in touch with employees. I never thought COVID-19 would be actually good for something, but in this case, it certainly allowed firms to quickly engage with all of their employees and keep them informed of any new developments. Obviously, public transport was off limits and kept our staff members at home and kept factories closed. So most of our members are reporting that downtime was the major impact, less so than actual damage. However, at the peak of the crisis, there was a real concern and fear around the potential of damage to the sites. We have a number of major hazardous installations in the Durban area, and of course the risk there is on a whole new level compared with a mall or a shop when it comes to fire and those safety risks, which really caused a high level of stress in our chemical sector. And moving on from that, obviously the knock-on effect was our raw materials not being sufficient to fulfill orders, stock being stuck at the port, and an example of a customer who actually moved to a competitor in Joburg because the KwaZulu-Natal operation was not able to meet that order. So again, at the risk of stating the obvious, just an overview of how our members were impacted at the peak of the crisis last week. Let me move on to a short introduction to our panelists who will join us today for some feedback. I see Ajiv has joined us, so welcome Ajiv, and thank you so much for your time. Cass and Ajiv have both been really at the forefront of the crisis throughout the course of last week and into this week. Both extremely busy men. We absolutely appreciate your time today. Thank you. Let me just skip through to my notes here. Sorry, I've got two sets of notes today. Kaz Kavadia retired as the Managing Director of the Banking Association of South Africa after spending 15 years there, and has taken up the role of CEO of Business Unity South Africa since July 2019, replacing Tanya Cohen. Busa was very quick to respond to the unrest last week, calling for a 24-hour curfew and immediate deployment of the army and police. very swift meetings with the economic cluster ministers and a call for information on damage to property and assets requiring protection was some action, at least at the beginning of last week, at a time when many of our members were frantically seeking support to defend those sites. So Business Unity South Africa really stood out to me and to our cluster as an entity who took very swift action at a time where many people were feeling very unsupported in terms of the response, in terms of security and assistance to secure their sites. So I would like to open the mic for 10 minutes to allow Kaz to give us his feedback. Business Unity South Africa collected a lot of information very quickly. So Kaz, if you could comment to us on what the impact has been noted so far from your point of view, obviously with reference to the chemical sector, but also South Africa at large, as well as where we are now. What is the situation that we're currently experiencing in the aftermath of that crisis last week, and what you believe to be our focus areas are to support recovery. Thanks, Kaz. Josh, if you can turn Kaz's camera
on. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, and letting a few words on what Busa has done and where we are. So let me just say that obviously this caught us all by surprise. But having said that, I think we should all have been better prepared for this. And I'll talk to that just now. But when the situation started deteriorating and when it started, we obviously made attempts to check what the impact on our members are, and it became quite clear that there's significant impact in KwaZulu-Natal and some in Gauteng. Amongst the critical issues for us was the closing of the threats to the Durban port, and what we saw as a lack of preparedness in government to actually protect some of the national points and also critical priority areas for business. And so we started interacting out. Our first meeting was with the meeting of the Minister of the Economic Cluster on that Tuesday after things started, and we impressed upon them what some of the key priority areas were, what some of the key hotspots, and we impressed upon them that they need more boots on the ground to actually not just be there when after the event occurs, but that we needed to sort of proaction and planning on the part of the security services to work with us in identifying critical assets that need to be protected and actually protecting before looters and others get to those assets. One of, I think, the positive outcomes of that was that we established, because some of the security service people were at that meeting, and we established a very good rapport with the National Joint Operations Center, and we delegated Roger Baxter from the Minerals Council to head up the Busa effort. And over the next few days, what we were able to do is we were able to feed into the National Joint Operations Center where the critical hotspots are, how they should be deploying the limited troops they had, and that's been always a problem, the capacity issue. We also managed to identify critical goods, including in the chemical industry, that needed to be transported, and provided escorts for some of those even before the N3 opened. We continued to impress on them the importance of opening the N3 because that was a critical arterial that the N3 not just on the transport of goods, but the knock-on effects of that to the economy, and we try to impress that upon them. And so we continue working with them information on an ongoing basis. We also, as soon as the N3 was open, coordinated delivery of particularly food and other essential items to KwaZulu-Natal. Guarega Mangoshe from the retail sector was responsible for coordinating that for us, and we did quite a bit of work on that. We also got a briefing from Sasria on whether they felt that they had the balance sheet to actually respond to claims that would come to them. And the briefing we got was that on their estimation, that if the damage and claims came to about 6 to 8 billion rand, they'd be able to manage that together with the reinsurers. But that they were also in discussion with National Treasury, and National Treasury had them that in the event that claims go beyond that, National Treasury will come to back them up on that and put in the necessary capital. So they started processing claims immediately. At the time I them, which was probably, I think, on Monday or Tuesday this week, they said claims were starting to come in, but not that fast. They had, I think, at that time about 1.5 billion rand of claims. But we just want assurance from Sasria that they are able to manage this. We've also started a process at NEDLAC where, together with other social partners, we engaging government on providing assistance to both employers and employees during this period, employers and employees that have been affected by this, not just the extension of TERS, but also to see if government could mobilize some funding to provide more sort of short to medium term support to those and employees. And National Treasury, together with Social Development, have indicated that they are working on that and they will come back to us on that. We also discussed at NEDLAC the possibility of whether we needed to put together some sort of a national disaster fund. And at that time, again, sometime on Monday, I think it was, we undertook at business to look. But in the meantime, what happened was that the board of the Solidarity Fund met, and they agreed to extend the mandate of the Solidarity Fund from pure vaccine-related assistance to broader assistance to look at the impact of the violence and destruction here. And because the board agreed to that, we felt that instead of putting together another fund, we would work with the Solidarity Fund, encourage corporates who want to actually contribute money to the Solidarity Fund. And we're working with them to put together a plan to see where the critical areas of need are, which service providers they work with, and particularly in food issues, and as well as some of the health issues the Solidarity Fund starts organizing and moving on that. We also looking at now what to do about the future. So I take your point in your introduction that this is about the impact on the chemical industry, and we don't want to talk about what caused this and so on. But in an interaction with the president Tuesday, I think it was, some of us did raise that the president had acknowledged that this was not a spontaneous thing, that there seems to be some instigation, and government that they had 12 suspects. President had also acknowledged that there were some failings in the intelligence and security part of government. And we indicated to the president on Tuesday that if he is correct, and some of us are of the view that he's correct, that government needs to be better prepared to protect property, to protect assets, to have the appropriate intelligence. And we indicated that if government, well, we said they should move with speed on that. They should identify where the weaknesses deal with those weaknesses, that business would stand ready to provide technical and other sort of capacity to help them plug some of those holes. We also indicated to him that it would certainly be for investor confidence if government is seen to be decisively moving to address what they think are the causes of this. So arrest those suspects, process them, bring them, ensure that people in government who need to be held accountable for the weaknesses are held accountable. So we've indicated that to the president. We've also started some work with one of the major auditing and consulting companies to do a fair amount of work on understanding the social traffic at that time, and to develop some sort of trends on that, and to try and understand where this came from and what we need to learn from that. And we are, as that is developing, we are passing that on to South African Police Services through Business Against Crime, so that they can also use that to actually track some of these people. So I think that's more or less where we are. We've also put in a call to our members, and Kaya would have received that as well, to just send us information as well on damage caused and so on. And that's being analyzed at the moment, and we put together some sort of a dashboard to understand all of that economy and share that with members. So let me stop there. I think that's a reasonable briefing on what's been happening. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Cas. That was a very detailed overview, and I think it's so important for our members who haven't had that insight as to what's been going on behind the scenes. And Busa has certainly taken major action in a short space of time. So we applaud your efforts and thank you for that feedback, Cas. It is hopefully some reassurance to a lot of our members on the call today. Before we move on to Ajif, I would just like to find my notes again and just introduce him properly. Ajif Maharaj is the head of the Economic Strategy, Policy, Innovation and Research at the eThekwini Municipality, and currently heads up the Durban Edge platform, which is a platform compiling data on global, domestic and the local economy, really trying to take stock of the bigger picture for us. Ajif, thank you so much for joining us today. We've heard from Cas from a national level and the efforts of Business Unity South Africa to tackle this situation head on. From the city's point of view, Ajif, are you able to give us some feedback similar to Cas just on the situation as to immediate impacts noted, where we are now, and how you are looking forward? If you wouldn't mind sharing 5 or 10 minutes of feedback with us. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Megan, and good morning, colleagues. I have a presentation. If I can.
You are welcome to share that. I can see it. Thank you, Ajif.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we've put together a response plan. I'll go through it very quickly, not kind of getting too bogged down in the detail. I think the cause, so it's a complex issue, but inequality, rampant unemployment and lack of economic growth have all played a key role. Obviously there was a political catalyst, and then also there were certain failures in governance and policing that contributed. Counting the costs in eThekwini, so we also have a survey running to try and establish the impact within the municipal area, and I think we've had some discussions with the province. I know DTI also has a survey running, so there's kind of quite a few platforms that businesses are being bombarded with different surveys and requests for information. I think the critical thing is for all of us to share information and try to streamline wherever possible. So the initial kind of impacts that we estimated were for eThekwini, which was R1 billion loss worth of stock, 15 billion rand worth of damage to property and equipment. And that these prelim stats were done on economic modeling rather than on actual on the ground assessment. So we looked at the kind of damages that we were seeing and the different properties affected, and we've got the valuation roll and data on different customers for the city. So we are estimating impact based on that rather than going out on the ground. But we have, since we've started to collect more information on the ground in terms of impact. So jobs, 130,000 workers that lost a week, 130,000 workers that lost a week worth of salary. And one of the important things we're seeing in terms of the survey from, we've got about 400 responses at the moment, but about 30% of businesses are undecided as yet whether they will reopen again. And we want to try and influence that, those businesses in particular to convince them to reinvest and to start to create jobs. Obviously, there's a need to take stock and reflect honestly. I'm gonna perhaps in the interest of time skip this slide, but there are certain key things. We've seen in the areas where that were affected by the unrest, high levels of inequality, high levels of unemployment, and you can plot spatially unemployment, and you'll see this has become a kind of breeding ground for unrest and social problems. So really at the heart of it, unemployment, although there are other things that I think government needs to, and the municipality as well, needs to take a more critical look at. So in terms of the response, we've had, through the DDM model, we've had interactions with our provincial and national colleagues. And we've kind of put together a short-term response. There's also medium and longer-term issues that need to be looked at. But in the short term, the coordinated safety response and the resourcing of police on the ground, we've seen critical failures in that regard. Things like having equipment to deal with riots and to deal with big protests. That kind of equipment, that resourcing was lacking, and even training as well. The other issue around social cohesion, so there's a plan worked on to build social cohesion, civic pride, and start to address all of those issues. I think in the short term, we've kind of acknowledged that it's too late for economic growth to address unemployment. that's more of a medium and a long-term challenge. In the short term, we need more kind of an emergency response. We need a lot of public sector-led employment to happen. So while business is also creating employment and we're boosting employment through business growth, there's a short-term need for public sector-led employment. We need to rescue our image and retain investment. So there's a lot of work being done in that regard. Incentivize reinvestment and rebuilding. So there are incentive programs that we're putting in place to assist businesses to rebuild. Scaling up skills and learnerships, and all of those kind of programs. You know, particularly now with online platforms, there's a potential to really scale up skilling in trades, and there's a lot of capacity at institutions that have been freed up. Business restart support, so there is a support program, and we need to make that very accessible. And then other issues such as scaling up service delivery and building accountability to communities and the business community, which I think has been lacking often. And then there are a range of medium-term issues around economic transformation, around how do we work with all three spheres of government, rethinking the township economic development model, and in particular the shopping center model, etc. But for now, we're just focusing on the short-term issues. And you know, as a city, we're working with all spheres of government as well as different business formations. So there's meetings happening. There's a meeting tonight with CEOs that the mayor and the MEC is having. So our response plan is based on 9 pillars. And I'll go through those pillars very briefly, but not really get into the action items as such. I think the first pillar is ensuring a safe and stable environment, and particularly securing key and strategic assets, including the refineries, port and logistics sector, health, food, water, electricity. Those are the kind of key things that the policing strategy is focusing on, but also then creating a safe and secure environment for business and households to be able to trade and get back to normal. We're lobbying government to declare the province and the city in particular as a disaster area to be able to unlock the disaster relief funding. And yeah, and then the more medium-term thing is to review the safety, security planning, and resourcing. And that's happening at the moment, even though, you know, there are medium-term issues there. There are some short-term issues, and council is going to make more funding available to address the shortcomings at the policing, at the level of policing on the ground. Understanding the damage, so there's a lot of that work that's happening to understand what the damage has been. The third pillar is around supporting businesses to restart, and this is critical for us. We've been lobbying CEDA for a dedicated support facility for stock and equipment for businesses that have been impacted, and there's a willingness from that side. We're in the process of setting up a one-stop center at the Durban Exhibition Center, and we've got commitment from the ICC for their staff to man that. So for all queries that business require, whether it's around building plans or rates relief or for buildings damaged, or whether it's to access funding from CEDA and other spheres of government. We want to channel that all into one kind of hotline and one place where business can interface with government. Urgently restoring supply chains and the distribution of goods and services. So there are a number of areas that where there are still food shortages, and we have our business support unit. They're setting up temporary food distribution points and assisting businesses to access food, linking corporates and SMME suppliers to these temporary distribution facilities, and that's happening in partnership with TIKZN and Itala. Re-engineering local supply chains as well. That's something that needs to happen to ensure more localization, more food security on the ground. Our business support unit is working with SMMEs and linking farms and SMMEs. And then obviously the clusters who are playing a critical role in disseminating information and supporting businesses. We also need to get the communication machinery up and running so that there's clear and information available to businesses on how to access assistance for what purpose. So we've also provided an exemption for buildings.
I'm terribly sorry to interrupt. I'm just very conscious of time. We have some really great questions in the chat. Can I politely ask if we can skip through? Please continue. Sure. Just your key points, and then we can move to those questions. Thank you.
All right, sure. So we want to provide incentives for, in the way of rates rebates for buildings that are damaged to, substantially damaged, for businesses to rebuild. We are working hard to retain investment and restore confidence, and particularly respond to issues that key clients have. So that's something that's happening. There's work happening around rebuilding tourism, restoring government infrastructure and services. So we reprioritizing budget and getting permission from national to repurpose grants to be able to direct to that. There's a whole program around social cohesion that I've highlighted. Responding to unemployment. So there's some critical things there that we're talking about. Scaling up public employment schemes, focusing on the youth. So there's a lot of budget and work that's been undertaken. We're also calling on national to look at the basic income grant, and I think that's critical in creating stability in the short term. And then there's a range of interventions around specific issues. And then the last one is around support from national government and other spheres of government that we're lobbying those spheres. And a lot of the same things that Cass has mentioned around securing key infrastructure, disaster relief funding, scaling up public employment, extending the UIF and the TERS benefit to businesses that are impacted, repurposing CEDA funding for loss of stock, and a range of things around that, rebuilding the image of the country and the city, and address also some nagging issues, intergovernmental issues around unfunded mandates and efficiencies in government that impact service delivery. So I'll leave it there, and then we can take questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Ajib. And it really is a pity to have to gloss over that detail. With your permission, we can perhaps share that content with our attendees to give them a chance to delve into that detail. And while Cass and Ajib were addressing us, we had some great questions come up in the chat. And I think these questions are possibly one at the forefront of many of our attendees' minds today. So I see Cass has managed to stay with us. Cass, the first question I'm going to pose to you, and this is asked on behalf of David Lombard as well as Justin Barnes. It's along the same theme. Based on your engagements that you described to us earlier from last week, and especially the importance of more boots on the ground in terms of the security services, what kind of confidence should we have that there will be a plan in place should unrest recur? Cass, can I unmute you?
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Thank
Okay. Look, I mean, it's a difficult question to answer with any sort of definitiveness, right? Because it basically lies, it's a lever government needs to pull. But I'm clear that as Busa, we need to keep putting pressure on government going forward, that they have to actually call people to account and to work with the private sector to assure us that they've learned from this episode, and that to assure us on an ongoing basis what to actually jack up the military, jack up the police, including, and with the police, it's not just a question of boots on the ground, it's also training police for these sorts of situations. Okay? So I mean, it just boggles the mind that police didn't use water cannons to disperse people, right? So they're just not trained for this. So the assurance I can give you, and that's why I personally raised this at the meeting with the president on Tuesday. The assurance I can give you is that Busa will put pressure on the president to address the weaknesses in the security system and demonstrate to us, with our help if they want it, but demonstrate to us that they are actually addressing these issues, and we will be better prepared going forward. And to then demonstrate that to our members. So that's the best I can give you.
Thank you. Thanks, Cass. And that pressure, I think, is going to be key going forward. It's really the best that Busa can do for now. I'm going to move on to a second and final question, which I was going to direct to Ajeev, but Russell Curtis has joined us from the city. Russell heads up the Invest Durban department, or I'm not sure if it's called a department these days. I'll let Russell introduce himself more proficiently to comment on the security situation in response to a question again from Justin. How do we trust local government on these commitments? It's a great presentation from Ajeev, but you know, where are we going to find comfort going forward? Russell?
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Megan, and colleagues on the call. Really just a quick comment. Is my voice coming through okay?
It is. Continue.
So I can confirm that the course of the events of the last 9-10 days have brought the chairs of state security and private security necessarily closer together. And so, as we all know now, SAP's Metro Police totally overwhelmed, and so private security stepped forward very quickly, and we have now got quite a robust, can I call it, public-private partnership grouping that's been running on a WhatsApp group. It is endorsed by the Durban Chamber of Commerce. It is endorsed by the KZN Growth Coalition, and it has the nod from the Premier and Mayor's office. And that has been deploying like crazy all over the city. We lost a lot that we couldn't get to. We managed to save some very key ones which were under direct threat, and we saved them largely because of extra private security. Some of that has been flown into the city and to further help. So I can tell you that now that we've largely understood what the strategy is by the treasonous cabal, largely suppressed the worst. Now that combination of private security and state security are a bit better capacitated to respond to the odd threats here and there, because it's not a whole-scale running warfare like we had last week. So bottom line is we're a lot safer now. We're not a lot wiser now. And I'm very, very grateful to the private sector security industry. And we can't lose now that intimate partnership between state security and the trusted private security, because there are a number of intractable issues that we were battling with, not the least of which were business forums, that machinery will now turn its attention to as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. Just checking out, I'm not on mute. Thank you very much, Russell. Again, so important for our members and industry at large to have a better understanding of what's been going on and continues to happen within our city and within eThekwini municipality in particular. Jeev, I would like to give you just a few minutes to contribute to those conversations if there's anything you would like to add.
No, I think Russell's covered all of the issues. I think for us, one of the key things that we need to work on as a city and as government is to build trust and build business confidence. And I think that is going to be critical in the next couple of months.
Mm. Agreed. You've hit the nail on the head there. Absolutely, Jeev. And thanks again to our panelists. I see Kaz has had to leave us today, but thank you again for your time, as well as Jeev, and thank you to Russell Curtis as well for your input. So let me just share my screen again. I am aware of time. We do still have about 12 minutes to go. What I would like to spend the last 10 minutes doing in the session is to move through our information gathering part of the session. The nice part about running these polls on Zoom is that I will be able to share the results with the group immediately. So you will be able to see the data and get a good sense of where your business is in comparison to others in the chemical sector at this time, and just help again to build that picture of information that is so critical to all of us at this time. So what I'll do is run a set of questions broadly along the topics of firstly operations. We'll then look at people, we'll look at supply chain, market demand, and then lastly a few questions around recovery. These are very short polls and I'm sure we'll get through them in the next 10 minutes. Please do continue to drop any questions that you may have in the chat, and we can address those before the end of the session. Otherwise, also pose those to our panelists later for further feedback. So our first poll looks at operations. Before I get into that, let me just check the Q&A. I see I missed a couple of questions there. I will come back to those if we have time. Otherwise, we'll provide that through our feedback after the session. Thank you for those questions. Our first poll, let me just launch that. So we're looking at operations. If I can ask you just to select as many answers here that are applicable to your operations. The question being, if your factory is currently not fully operational, what are the reasons? So we're talking about if you haven't returned to full operations as yet, if you could indicate what those reasons are. Thank you. We've got a very, very strong theme of supply chain disruption being the leading cause of limited operations, and also related to customers having withdrawn orders as also a very strong reason. I'm going to leave it open for another half a minute and then I will share the results. Supply chain disruption, a very strong theme, as well as customers still. We do have the reason as fear of continued unrest as also being a key factor there. We still have a few answers coming in, bear with me. And 10 seconds, I will then close. Okay, based on 11 responses from those on the call, I will share the results. So as you can see, supply chain disruption is the key issue at the moment, followed by customers having withdrawn orders, which is understandable, especially if alternate suppliers can be supplied elsewhere in the country. So thank you for that feedback. I'm not going to ask for comments from our members because we are running a little short on time, but we would really appreciate your feedback in the chat as to what your key supply chain disruption is at this time. That will enable us to feed that back into the crisis management teams, as well as into our report back to industry. So skipping ahead to our next slide, which has a look at the people impact. That I have felt has been a very strong impact just with speaking with our various members throughout this week and last week. It's been a huge impact from what I've noted, but I'd like to see how our members have been affected more directly. Let me launch this poll. The question being, how were your employees affected? Obviously assuming that you do have sites where the unrest occurred. We had reports of some physical harm, fortunately not many. Transport was a key issue, just not being able to get to work. And then of course it wasn't safe to do so in many cases. And then the psychological trauma was very real. There were very few of us in KZN who didn't feel it. Many directly and many indirectly. And that also has an impact in the workplace, certainly this week and in weeks to come. So we've got about we've got 15 responses, and fortunately the indication is that most employees were unharmed but simply were not able to get to work. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds, but we still have some responses rolling in. Okay, great. We've got 20 responses and I will share that result with you. Thankfully, no direct physical harm. That is a blessing, but really just not being able to get to work was a key challenge in terms of employees, as well as the psychological trauma, which is something that will have to be addressed in weeks to come, I'm sure. Let me move through to supply chain. I think this has really been a key barrier to many people. I'm going to launch this poll. If you are experiencing supply chain disruption at the moment, if you could indicate what that critical break is, whether it be logistics in terms of transport, getting materials in and out of the port, and availability of raw materials, which it could be related to the first answer, although it could also relate to a supplier who has been impacted, and then direct damage to a key supplier or customer. Logistics really was a key factor. Cass mentioned it with a strong focus on getting that N3 open. It's absolutely a critical transport node for us between Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Great, thank you for all your responses. 10 more seconds and I will share those results. I think for supply chain, it's been fairly obvious. And 15 respondents have indicated logistics being the critical break at the moment in terms of supply chain. We have 5 more minutes, enough time to run through our final poll and then just pause for some reflection and discussion as we close this session. Oh, sorry, I'm skipping through my slides. I lied, there's 2 more polls. So looking at market demand, let me launch the correct poll there. So within your firms, how do you expect the unrest to impact your market demand? Are you expecting no change or decline or increase as indicated there? It's interesting to see that we do have a firm indicating increase, perhaps more than one. That is something that can be an unexpected and often welcome consequence, as we saw through the COVID-19 crisis as well, how market demand was a very sort of polar, I'm trying to find the right word now, it was either really good or really terrible, and I suppose this type of crisis does yield that response. 10 more seconds. 12 respondents have indicated a decline between 11 to 20%. That is the leading statistic so far. And let me share that result with you. 15 respondents have indicated a 33% response in the decline by 11 to 20% category. That's a little more than I was expecting, actually, and really indicates the true impact of last week's unrest. Right, I really am going to close off now and move to the last set of polls where we will pause for some discussion. Recovery. We've got 3 questions under recovery to get a sense of where our firms are in terms of firstly being able to recover, and then looking at investment and some investment sentiment. So there are 3 questions here. I will give you a chance just to digest them and to answer all 3 if you're willing. The first one is indicating if your business is able to recover from this crisis, and then indicating the degree of that. Also, how this has affected your investment confidence in South Africa, and then how this has affected your business confidence specifically in KwaZulu-Natal. If you're able to give us any feedback on these 3 questions, we would appreciate that. Thank you. So far we have firms indicating that they will struggle to recover fully because there's been significant impact. Some have also indicated minimal impact and full recovery is possible. Investment confidence has taken a knock. Certainly, we're seeing some responses that the businesses will continue to invest, but cautiously in South Africa. And then business confidence in KwaZulu-Natal, similar response. There will be continued investment, but cautious. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds and then share what our members have indicated. Great, so we've got 13 responses, and I will share those results with you. So fortunately, we're looking at 85% of our respondents are indicating full recovery, which is encouraging. Some also experiencing a more significant loss. Investment confidence in South Africa, we're looking at a cautious approach from our respondents on the survey, but also businesses calling for fundamental changes. And I think that's been very clear from the discussions today. Investment confidence in KwaZulu-Natal, similar response to South Africa, a cautious approach. Thank you. We really appreciate your feedback there. It's going to inform our sector situation reports, which will consolidate what we've learned today, as well as provide all of our members with a consolidated overview of the sector. Sean has just reminded me, if you can please have a look in the chat, there's a link there to a short survey, like I mentioned, 10 questions, which gathers slightly more detailed information to enable us to compile that to feed through to the Office of the President, as well as to inform our sector situation reports. You will have also received that on email. If I can impress upon everyone, please to answer that for us. You will get something back for it. You will actually get an informative sector situation report that will summarize everything we've managed to gather and learn this week from our stakeholders. All right, we are starting to go just over time, but I don't want to cut our session short. I would like to just revisit the questions as well as the chat comments and make sure that we've had opportunity just to reflect on information shared today and just be able to contribute as a sector this morning. So I'm just looking at the Q&A here. I think this question was addressed by both Russell and both Ajif. If I can just go back to the chat. Okay, I think we have addressed all the questions in the chat. If anybody would like to raise a comment, please do raise your hand in the attendees list, and we can allow you to make a comment before closing the session. It's been a very insightful session. I'm sure for yourselves as well as me, I was encouraged to hear about what Busa has put in place very quickly over the last week and a half, as well as the feedback from the city. Information is power. It really is. By having a good sense of factual, obviously, and real information, it enables us to make informed decisions and to take our businesses forward. So one last appeal to please to complete that survey for us, and thank you again very much for your attendance today. We do have one last poll just to assess the session today, as we usually do. We would love your feedback on how we can improve our working group sessions. But all the best. Thanks again for joining us this morning, and please do contact the Durban Chemicals Cluster. You know where we are, and please send in your comments and feedback, and we will be in touch with those feedback reports early next week. So thanks everybody, and we'll close the session here.